Lando Norris's Saudi Arabian Grand Prix is going to be much tougher than it appeared it was going to be after he ended up in the wall in qualifying. Scott, he'll start 10th after crashing in Q3. Looked like pole position was a formality. What did you make of his accident?
Yeah, it was Lando paying a very big price for a very small misjudgment. It's not like he's gone in, 15, 20 kilometres an hour too hot or brake 20 metres too deep, locked up spectacularly and missed the corner completely, is it? It's a small bit of understeer on entry, run wide, on a painfully punishing exit curb, a little bit of a wobble that turns into a bigger snap, tries to correct it, nearly got away with it, smacked into the wall super hard at high speed and just caused, obviously, that damage. He was never going to save the lap, but he might have just got away with saving the car. Obviously, didn't happen. It felt like a very different version of the little errors we've seen creeping in and what he's talked about struggling with this car. But even if the circumstances were different to Bahrain, for example, where he has been on top of it all weekend, there's still an underlying theme, recurring theme to all of this, isn't there?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, Bahrain was an all-round driving struggle. This was a specific incident. Race drivers crash, don't they, particularly in qualifying. But that challenge he has of knowing how far to reach in qualifying, that search for the perfect lap, that I need to be at 100% exactly, not 99.9, that is something that we've talked about a lot over the years with Lando Norris, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it's become more pronounced with this car. This McLaren, as I think we have touched on plenty of times already this season, is more punishing when you try to take it to 100%, and the way that Lando drives, I think, induces that a little bit more than the way Oscar drives does it. Partly we see that in driving style and in mistakes where I think Norris tries to take maybe a bit too much speed through the corner because his natural style, that more sort of classic U style, rolling the speed through the corner, means a high minimum corner speed. It means trying to ask more of both axles on entry, using more of the aero, etc. Small margins, but they make a big difference, whereas Piastri, more of the V style, brake a little bit later, brake a little harder, rotate the car a little bit more, take a bit less speed through the corner but come off the corner quicker, maybe takes the car to the maximum just that tiny bit less. But I think we also see a different kind of version of it, which is I think what we saw today, because obviously the nature of the accident that Norris had, the corner that he had it's not a big braking zone or anything like that. I think what we see is that Norris has a tendency perhaps to just chase that tiny extra hundredth of a second here, pinch another metre of braking here, a little bit, a metre more on full throttle before he lifts, that kind of thing. And that's leading to little bits of imprecision. And I think imprecision is the underlying theme. That's what, when I spoke to Andrea Stella, the team boss, was describing these as episodes that Norris is having. I think what's linking the episodes is imprecision when chasing that final hundredths of a second. And here I think it's safe to say a little bit more entry speed, maybe a slightly later turn-in, missed the apex, bit of understeer on the curb, and then the crash happens.
Yeah, it was actually a corner where he was consistently quicker than Piastri in terms of the minimum speed in the corner, again, that U technique that you taught of. And of course, Piastri had a moment there, Max Verstappen had a moment there, so very much on edge. And what was interesting is the contrast, because last week, at every opportunity, every time a camera or a dictaphone or anything was pointed at Lando Norris, he was talking about how he couldn't drive, he was clueless, didn't know how to drive a Formula One car. This time, he sort of hopped out the car, wasn't delighted by things, but he seemed to have a much more sanguine air. Now, do you think that was sincere, or do you think that was, maybe I overdid it last time, I'm going to try and shrug this off?
No, I think it was sincere. I think it's two things. One, I think Norris is trying very hard to react better, not be so hard on himself. I know that McLaren are really keen for him to stop being so hard on himself and are trying to help him achieve that. And then I think the second factor is that this was a different set of circumstances. And I think that makes it a bit easier for Norris to not shrug it off, because as he says, he let McLaren down. He should be starting at the front. He's not. He should be fighting for the win tomorrow. He needs circumstances to go his way to do that. But unlike Bahrain, where he was chasing the car, where he was slower than Piastri, where he was uncomfortable with his driving, where he didn't know how to unlock the speed, he's been rapid here this weekend. You said it at the very start. He's been on top. This should have been his pole. And in a way, that might make it harder to take, because he's thrown away a better result. And the consequences are bigger than last week, not just because he's in the wall, but because he's starting further down the grid as well. But I just think that whole mindset that he's wrapped up in is therefore different because it's much more positive. And I think in that situation, it is a bit easier to move past it and say it's one of those things that happens. The one caveat I'd add to that is that I think Stella reacted very differently to that. Not in a way of like throwing Lando under the bus or anything, but he was definitely more keen to say this wasn't an isolated incident, this is connected to the other stuff we've been talking about.
And also connected to the car as well. He says we've got to give them a more predictable car. These cars can be quite tricky on the limit and they're fine until they catch you out. So also he took a little bit of flack away from Norris in terms of saying, well, we need to make this better. And of course, I guess Norris can look at it and say, on a track like this, you're always flirting with disaster in qualifying. Max Verstappen hit the wall here in 2021, didn't he? And we've seen every great driver's had a shunt at a street circuit over the years, usually more than one. So I think, although Norris did admit that perhaps he was being a little bit too attacking on the first Q3 run when he should have been on a banker, I think it will legitimately be a little bit easier to deal with.
I think so. The one thing I think is interesting to pick up on, you mentioned it there about what Stella was saying about the car and the contribution it makes. And this isn't to make excuses for Norris, I just think it's an interesting thing that Stella was really, really emphasising tonight when I spoke to him. Great line from Stella where he said, these cars are too fast to think in. And the way it is for Lando in these cars at the moment is he is having to think about it that little bit more than Piastri is. As I said before, there may be an element of the car suiting Piastri's driving style a little bit more, or perhaps a slightly more accurate way of viewing it is it's not as punishing on Piastri's style as it is perhaps on Norris's. Again, that doesn't excuse Norris for constantly making the mistakes. It maybe just explains why he's more prone to them or why he can induce the errors. But what Stella was saying is that you almost have to be ahead of these cars. You know, you have to be threading them through the corners so unconsciously without thinking about it. Look at what Lewis Hamilton is suffering with at Ferrari. It's almost Daniel Ricciardo at McLaren situation where you're having to kind of rewire it and think consciously about what you're doing. And Norris, it felt like, was in that kind of in the zone, nice and natural, doing everything that he needed to do all through free practice and pretty much through Q1 and Q2 as well. And then I don't know what it is, but maybe what Stella's getting at, and maybe what Norris is sort of breezing past a little bit in his reaction to the crash is, once it comes to Q2 and the pressure is there, and you do have to get those last few hundreds, because Max Verstappen did a fantastic job today, and the fact he's beaten Oscar Piastri proved that having a McLaren wasn't enough in itself to be on pole. Maybe that's where Norris is asking that little bit extra of the car, and then that is either inducing that instability, the understeer, a mistake, whatever, or it's creating a mistake in himself with a misjudgment, a bit of imprecision, and it just manifests itself at the worst possible moment because Q3 is where it all counts.
And it is a blow, of course, for the championship. He's going to start 10th. We're expecting a one-stop race. He will make up positions, but it's going to be very, very difficult to get too far up there. But as you said, Max Verstappen, phenomenal job to put it on pole. Interestingly, he was one of the few that after the red flag that Norris caused, went out quickly to squeeze in a new first run on the tyres he'd gone out on initially. And he did actually put himself on provisional pole with that, slightly quicker than Piastri, who was the one driver who'd actually set a time before the red flag. And then he felt that sighter just gave him that little edge. And when we're talking about hundredths of a second, the fact Verstappen squeezed that in and Piastri didn't seemed to make all the difference.
Yeah, and I think one thing to add is that when you've got that kind of feeling in the car, comfort in the car, confidence in the car to do what Norris was trying to do, squeeze every millimetre out of it, squeeze every little bit of brake, lift off the throttle, opening up the corner on the way in, getting close to the wall at the apex, riding the curb on the exit. That's where you get the gains, and Verstappen is better than pretty much anyone else at that. Liam Lawson said that. He was watching Max's Q3 laps in front of me in the mix zone in the middle of Q3. And yeah, so I think that sighter was a big impact, but I think it speaks to just the quality that Verstappen was performing at, that even with the fuel in for that sighter, he's able to do such a good first lap and then find even more time on the second lap, especially to hang on right at the end, as we know the McLaren is so strong at the end of the lap. But Verstappen was I think, again, 100% of what the Red Bull was capable of here, which was at a higher level than it was capable of in Bahrain, whereas Norris didn't prove what 100% of the McLaren was capable of, even though he was the driver more likely to get it, and Piastri was just that tiny little bit short of 100% in the McLaren.
Absolutely. Still going to be hard for Norris, though. He's going to be back on the 5th row. His 2 title rivals on the front row should make for an interesting race.